Hello there, welcome. I am delighted to have you join us on this edition of People, Politics and Power. Now, some years ago, Nigeria voluntarily set 2020 to end gas flaring. This is 2021 and Nigeria is still flaring gas. The Nigeria Gas Master Plan was created in 2008 to end gas flaring through improved domestic consumption. In 2016, Nigeria launched the gas flare commercialization program to monetize flared gas and end routine flaring, with a strategy to eliminate routine gas flaring by the year 2020. Government said then that it would use the gas flare commercialization program to drive positive social, environmental, and economic impact in the Niger Delta by mobilizing private sector capital towards gas flaring. He said if properly harnessed, the associated gas could provide approximately 450,000 metric tons of liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, to over 4 million Nigerian households, and with an investment of about $3.5 billion. The Nigerian gas flare commercialization program was then expected to generate 25 gigawatts or 2,500 megawatts of power and create about 300,000 direct and indirect jobs, while eliminating over 20 million tons of CO2 emissions per year. It was also expected to provide clean energy to 6 million households. Now, before then, in 1979, Nigeria enacted the Associated Gas Reinjection Act to reinject all gas produced in association with oil production, but not utilized. Government revoked the licenses of defaulters in fields where gas was flared. The National OSP Detection and Response Agency, NOSDRA, is a government agency charged with regulating standards in the industry. NOSDRA says Nigeria flared 1.7 billion cubic feet of gas between 2012 and 2020. The agency's data shows that gas is flared from 8 locations in Abia, Akwa Ibom, Anambra, Bayelsa, Delta, Edo, Lagos, and Rivers states. And this is valued at over $6 billion. And if the oil companies responsible for the flaring were fined, it would have amounted to about $3.4 million revenue during that period alone. Now, Nigeria says at the end of 2020 alone, a total of 380 million standard feet of gas was flared in the country. In addition, 17 million tons of carbon monoxide was emitted into the atmosphere and therefore contributing to global warming. Gas valued at $1.12 billion, burnt by the oil industry, an equivalent of $637 million worth of fine, which are not collected by government. Nigeria has ratified the Paris Climate Change Agreement and is a signatory to the Global Gas Flaring Partnership Principles for global flare out by 2030. And that's just 9 years away. How and why did Nigeria miss its set target date of 2020 to end gas flaring? What are the implications for the environment, for climate change, and especially the health of the people who live in the Niger Delta? What are the short and long-term implications of continued unbridled, reckless, and unsanctioned flaring of gas for the Nigerian economy? Does the Nigerian government lack the political will to enforce its own laws in the face of multinational oil companies bullying or compromise? Join us in the discussion after this timeout. We have guests and specialists in this area who will be looking at all of this. Stay with us. All right, we'll now be meeting our guests who are joining us via Zoom from various parts of the country. We'll have joining us Akinbode Oluwafemi. Mr. Oluwafemi is the Executive Director, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa, CAPA. Now, he also the former Deputy Environmental Rights Action and Friends of Earth Nigeria, former Deputy Director of ERA. Thank you so much, Mr. Oluwafemi, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Also joining us is Ken Henshaw. Ken Henshaw is the Executive Director, We the People, an NGO working closely with Niger Delta communities in the context of oil extraction and its fallouts, as well as in the management of public revenue. Mr. Henshaw, thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Now, let us also tell you very quickly that we did invite the Director General of NOSDRA, Mr. Idris Musa, who is actually the man directly in charge of NOSDRA, the National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency, otherwise known as NOSDRA. We invited Mr. Idris to this program as the head of that government agency that is responsible for the control and, of course, regulation of that industry. And he was invited to this program, and twice he requested that the program be postponed, which we obliged, and he on his own chose this day, February 8th, as the date for this program. Unfortunately, after making that request and choosing the date, Mr. Idris eventually chickened out of the program just a few hours ago without any reasons. He did not give any explanations for dropping out of the program. So we are, however, going ahead with our discussion as we have two experts joining us to discuss these issues. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us, Akinbode Oluwafemi and Ken Henshaw. Right, so let's begin. Let's look at the state of gas flaring in Nigeria today. Mr. Oluwafemi, what exactly is the situation in Nigeria now?
Well, as you rightly said, ending gas flaring in Nigeria has become a moving goalpost. And Nigeria is currently at about the 7th largest gas flarer in the world. What first we need to look at is the legal framework for this particular practice. In 2005, Justice C.N. Nwokore of the Federal High Court, sitting in Benin, in a suit brought by the Iwerekan community of Delta State, had declared gas flaring illegal in Nigeria. To this day, we are not aware of any other suits challenging that court pronouncement. So by virtue of that judgment, the first thing you say that gas flaring is illegal. Now, back to what you said about the intimidation and the undermining of our policy by fossil fuel transnational, is that not only that have they continued flaring of gas, but they have also continued to manipulate government policies to suit them. But even at that, the current policy says that you pay $2 for 1,000 cubic feet of gas flat. That is extremely ridiculous, because even when you look at it from the perspective of business, there is what is called cost benefit ratio. So you find out that the companies will prefer to continue to pay $2 for 1,000 cubic feet of gas than either reinjecting associated gas or making investment in gas. And then you then come back to the impact of gas flaring on the environment, on public health, on the economy of the local people. Gas flaring is a major contributor to climate change, contributing several billions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year. And you also agree with me that climate change is an human emergency as of today that we cannot quantify in the impact of climate change, and everybody around the world is coming together to say, look, we've got to do something about this. And gas flaring is Africa's biggest contribution to the climate change phenomenon. So we can also look at that again, back to the local communities who have their farmland heated up. They're perpetually in the furnace of heat. The study shows that about 2 million people actually live less than a kilometer, about a kilometer of a gas flare. And so you have their homes heated up, you have system heated up, there is possibility of, cancer and several other diseases. So this is the situation we are in, and we have a government that doesn't seem to be ready to end gas flaring. So gas flaring continues rather than abating in Nigeria.
Mr. Henshaw, let's look at the operating environment of gas flaring at the moment. Is it that Nigeria do not have laws, or the laws are inadequate, or that the laws are there, but there is a lack of political will to enforce them?
Well, I think it is a little bit of all of that. Unfortunately, we do not have any law that expressly outlaws gas flaring. Such a law does not exist. And like my friend Bode said, over the years, Nigeria has, rather than stop gas flaring, resorted to collecting paltry fines from oil companies, while the environment keeps being spoiled. So there are no laws in place, but we have what we call judicial precedent. And like you mentioned, in 2005, there was a case brought by a community on the subject matter of gas flaring, and that community won that case, basically saying gas flaring is illegal. It constitutes a loss of livelihood. It poisons the people, and as such should be stopped. That judgment was never appealed, like Mr. Bode said. And so, legally speaking, by that precedent of the court, gas flaring is illegal in Nigeria. But it continues nonetheless. And the reasons are very, very obvious. Because the oil majors who operate the majority of oil fields in Nigeria have made it seem as if the business of oil extraction cannot continue without the flaring of gas. And that is a blackmail they have consistently, presented to the government of Nigeria. And I can tell you authoritatively that the very first time Nigeria made an attempt to stop gas flaring was in 1979. And between 1979 and 2021, the target for ending gas flaring has been consistently moved a total of 9 times. And the latest time it was moved was the 2007 target, which was boldly pronounced by the then Minister of Petroleum, Mr. Ibe Kachuku. He said it over and over, even up to the close of 2019, and even in the middle of 2020, people in the corridors of the Nigerian oil company sector boldly said that gas flaring will be ended. But of course, the government has never, ever been committed to ending gas flaring. And that takes me back to one of the rationale you put up there, which was a political will. There is absolutely no political will at ending gas flaring. That is the reality. And that's also because the government of Nigeria does not see gas flaring as a major loss of economic benefits, as a major loss of access to energy, as a major factor contributing to sicknesses and ill health in Niger Delta communities and to environmental pollution. The government only sees it from the economic perspective. And you can even see that in the PIB currently being proposed to the federal government, to the National Assembly right now. If you look at the PIB, the government says nothing about the so-called 2030 flare-out dates. Nothing is said whatsoever What the government instead says is that if gas that the Minister of Petroleum can give waivers for gas flaring for companies to flare gas. Okay, it talks about waivers. It does not talk about flare out. It instead talks about fines. And it's funny. It's really funny because even those fines mentioned in the PIB are going straight to the federal government and not to the communities whose environment is being destroyed and whose health are being compromised. And so I think it's all of the above. The government has no will. The government is not committed, and there are no strong legal frameworks in place to ensure that gas flaring ends.
The NOSDRA is a specialized agency of government that is supposed to be dealing with issues of OSP, gas flaring, and all such issues that are associated with oil and gas exploration in the country. Do you think that NOSDRA is properly equipped and properly staffed to do this, to carry out this responsibility, given the fact that his leadership has been, as it were, for example, we invited to this program to come and talk on these issues and has been dilly-dallying over it for well over 3 weeks?
That's a question to Ken Henshaw, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah, so it's a good question. I think that NOSDRA does not have the capacity, including the technical expertise and the financial resources, which is required to monitor environmental pollution, especially in the oil and gas sector. It is not primed in any way to do so. I'm also aware that there was an amendment bill for that agency, and it got up to the presidency, and accent was declined. And if that bill had been signed and become law, we would have had the situation where the agency would have been empowered significantly to ensure that an occurrence, and a poisonous occurrence like gas flaring, is outlawed. But it's difficult. It's difficult for you to empower an agency of government to act when the government itself it's an interested party in action. The Nigerian government benefits through fines, which it utilizes, through fines which it gets. It benefits from gas flaring, right? So it's an interested party, and it is difficult to have an agency empowered to stop gas flaring. So it's like the government checking itself. That's not possible. And so the agency has basically failed. And that's not just my judgment. That's the judgment, that's the perspective of the majority of people who live in the Niger Delta region.
Mr. Oluwafemi, what's your response to that?
I completely agree with Ken. First is we have to look at the policy framework that created some of these agencies, NOSDRA, DPR, and the rest of them that has to do with even the Ministry of Environment. Are the policies and framework sufficient? I would say a big no. Are they adequately resourced to do what we expect them to do for the environment? In this case, gas flaring, I would say no. The Ministry of Environment itself is like an appendage, agency of government, because of the kind of ridiculous resources allocated to it vis-a-vis the responsibility, the role of that particular very important agency. But most importantly, as he has rightly said, is that we don't seem to have a central government that is interested in the environment. We don't seem to have a central government that is interested in protecting the lives of the people that are affected by constant 24 hours flares in the Niger Delta. We don't seem to have a federal government that is interested in ending gas flaring. But it's quite unfortunate that, rather than looking at the tokenism of the oil industry, is to look at the loss in terms of what is Nigerian government even losing in terms of revenue, which is at the region of several billions of dollars, as well as over 39 billion that is the environmental cost of gas flaring annually, so that the government can then begin to take appropriate action in gas flaring. So it's all of what you said. There is no political will. There is no institutional or legal framework. And let me tell you this. Part of what we have discover on the field for a lot of government agencies that are meant to regulate oil companies in Nigeria is that they still rely on the infrastructure of the companies they are supposed to regulate. Do you understand? So you have, for instance, a DPR or a NOSDRA that wants to go and monitor a spill, let's say onshore, that does not have the necessary transport logistics. And so they still come back to the same corporation that has committed the environmental infringement to provide them with vehicles, to even sometimes provide them with hotels, to provide them with choppers to be able to access those places. I mean, we all know what kind of reports do you expect? Because from day one, they are already compromised in doing their job because they have to rely on the infrastructure of some of these people. I mean, it just begs the question when we expect them to do what is right. When even as at today, there is no government agency that is so empowered to know how much of crude is pumped out of the Niger Delta every day. They have to rely by data supplied by the oil companies. These are all we need to look into. And I like the fact that Ken mentioned the PIB. When the whole movement for PIB started, we had expected a PIB that will address holistically some of these and not a PIB that is going to be, kowtowing to the interest of corporation. And I say this emphatically because when the companies went for the public hearing, their biggest interest was, please protect our investment in the Niger Delta. Nobody is talking about the lives of the Niger Delta people. Nobody is talking about the farmlands that are polluted every day. Nobody is talking about suits in Port Harcourt. Nobody is talking about how many people. As of today, this current government has not said a single word about fishes that died and are washed across to the ocean as a result of so many of these oil companies' activities. So what we do have today is a government that is paying less and less attention to the lives, the public health of the people and to the environment. And until Nigerians can, make them to work for the people, I don't expect to see much.
Now, can you and your organization with the people work with communities in the Niger Delta? Let's delve a little bit deeper into these issues. NOSDRA's own statistics indicates that the gas is fled in 8 of the Niger Delta states. Now, these are just the states we are mentioning now. There could be several flaring points in each of these states, in each of the Abia, Akwa Ibom, Anambra, Bayelsa, Delta, Edo, Lagos, and Rivers. Now, there could be several flaring points in these places. Now, since you work in that area, you would possibly have some better statistics for us of these flaring points and the populations that are affected by this gas flare.
Well, so I heard the states you mentioned, the only, you said 8 states where gas is being fled. Those are the Niger Delta states. You need to also mention Lagos State now. Gas is also being fled.
Lagos is there.
Lagos State. Okay,
yes.
Good. I think it's only in Cross River State that gas is not being fled at the moment because technically speaking, Cross River State is no longer oil producing. And when you mention it like that, it feels as if there are 8 flare points. That's absolutely wrong. I mean, if you go to a place like Delta State around OML 30, you see several flare points from community to community. Sometimes these communities are just 15 minutes apart of each other. Sometimes you can even see 2 flare points in one community. And I have visited these communities extensively. They have 2 types of gas flaring. There's very vertical, there's horizontal, each of them with the same devastating effect on the environment in the Niger Delta. And there are several. I have no data because some of these data are very keenly guarded by oil companies. And it's surprising that each of these flare points are actually armed. I mean, before you get to any flare point, you would have to pass through a military post. So people are not, very freely allowed to walk into these gas flare sites and take pictures and conduct interviews, right? They are not allowed to do so. And the question is, why are these facilities being so highly protected? Because there's an interest for the world not to see what is actually going on in those places. And I tell you, I mean, if you have not, I took a friend once, a colleague who works in Abuja. He works in the oil and gas sector, but had never ever gone to a gas flare site. I got to a gas flare site with him in Delta State, and he had his mobile device in his hands, and he was filming gas flaring. And as he got closer and closer and closer, and he was about till about 15 yards away from the flare point, and his mobile phone shut down. And when he looked at the message on the screen, and he said the message was clear. It said um, temperature too high. And he was shocked that women were right there inside the flare point, about 15 yards from him, and they were in close interaction with that. You need to get to a gas flare point for you to actually feel the impact of this. So it's noisy. There's a buzzing sound coming out of it. There's that constant brightness all over the community. When you have constant brightness, it affects the eye. Okay. So mentally, people are no longer able to tell between night and day, right? When this flare goes up into the sky, I mean, this is poisonous chemical. It goes up into the sky. When it rains, it comes down as acid rain. It destroys crops that you plant. It messes up water sources. It destroys roofing sheets. It corrugates your car. Everything is just messed up on account of gas flaring. And in our researches, we have been to the field and we have talked to people. I did an interview a few months ago with a woman who told me a few women who have said that the effect of gas flaring has affected the performance, the potency, the sexual potency of their husbands. These are just some of the effects. We know for a fact that the flare causes diseases of the epidermis, skin discoloration. We also know it has a very terrible effect on the eyes. We know that it leads to diseases of the lungs, respiratory diseases, difficulty in breathing. We know that the flare poisons food people eat. So you plant vegetables and the flare descends back as rain, on the crops. You uproot them and eat. It destroys them. I mean, the effects are just so many. And you need to get into the Niger Delta and you see that in some instances, the gas flare points are right there in the middle of the communities. And it's unfortunate that people who make policies for the country perhaps have never ever visited a flare site, have never spent up to 10 minutes beside a gas flare point, right? But people in the Niger Delta region have had to live with this environmentally terrible, health poisonous, and economically wasteful practice of gas flaring. It's unfortunate. We indeed, like Bode said, we expected to see much, much more traction from the PIB addressing what seems to be the most important and fundamental environmental problem associated with the extraction of crude oil. But unfortunately, the PIB makes absolutely no improvement as it relates to gas flaring. Absolutely nothing. And we think that's fundamentally flawed.
All right, Mr. Henshaw and Oluwafemi, please stay with us. Let's go on this short break. When we return, we'll be looking at the economics of gas flaring, what Nigeria stands to benefit from the ending of gas flaring, whether now or in 2020 when there is a global flare out target date, and what it is losing at the moment by imposing what many consider to be very, very minimal and outrageous fines for gas flaring in Nigeria. Stay with us. All right, thank you so much for staying with us. People, Politics and Power, we're looking at the failed target of 2020 to end gas flaring in Nigeria. Mr. Oluwafemi, if you recall, in 1979, there was a Gas Reinjection Act, which was meant to reinject all gas produced in association with oil production, but unutilized. Then in 2016, Nigeria launched the Nigeria Gas Flare Commercialization Project. And that project was meant to monetize flared gas and end routine flaring. What has happened to these two initiatives?
Well, the two initiatives had failed. Kent said that, and I just to recall, that we have moved the target to end gas flaring like about 9 different times. In addition to those two you mentioned, it's also something like Nigerian Gas Transportation Logistic Act or something like that. And they were supposed to Encourage cooperation first. The uh, gas reinjection act was to encourage people in the industry to put investment in, re-injecting gas and then processing them to LPG, and then it comes into economic line, into the economic activity. But I mentioned earlier that if a fine on gas flaring as of today still stand at $2, what private companies do is to weigh the economic benefit ratio. I mean, how much does it cost us to flare gas, and how much are we going to benefit if we have to invest so massively in reinjecting associated gas and then converting it to LPG and the rest of them? So not much has been seen in terms of critical investment to end what is a monumental wastage. Nigerian government is losing about 230 something billion annually as a result of gas flaring. If our gas resources are well um, and it's, I mean, some economists have told us that it will contribute to about $11 billion into our economy every year. It will lead to about 300,000 jobs, etc., etc. But because the government is not putting in place appropriate sanction, because the first thing that has to happen is for government itself to say, no, we are done with this because this economic model is wasteful. That has not encouraged that particular shift that we want. The government must create enough policy environment. Take, for instance, the issue of the gas commercialization project. That has only led to the escalation of gas explosion across Nigeria. Why? Because the regulatory authorities did not put in place enough mechanism to ensure that charlatans, people who does not have the interest of the environment, does not enter into this highly volatile industry and continue to cause injury on lives and the environment. So the government must go back to the drawing board to first and foremost recognize that continuing gas flaring is not economical. It is not, it's extremely wasteful. The Nigerian environment is losing close to $30 billion every year as a result of the health impact of flaring and on the environment, etc. To now sit down and reason how to change sincerely this method of producing oil in the Niger Delta to the benefit of the environment and the benefit of the people. And then say, look, if you flout the law, you then as a government must be ready to wield the big stick. And as I said, there must be effective regulatory framework to ensure that companies do not flout our laws just anyhow as we have as of today.
Well, Mr. Henshaw, let's go back to the environment. I mean, merely looking at those visuals that we have been showing will indicate to you that the environment around the immediate environs and in fact far afield, almost every living thing in that area is as good as dead. And people in these communities in the Niger Delta are mostly farmers, they are fishermen, and yet we have a situation where gas is flared 247, 24 hours. How has that impacted their livelihoods, the agricultural resources of those areas?
Well, it has impacted the livelihoods of the people of the Niger Delta very, very significantly. And so the twin evils of environmental pollution that we deal with in the Niger Delta context is that of gas flaring, but also oil pollution, oil spills. And these two put together have basically destroyed, the environment of the Niger Delta and made it impossible for people to exist. Let me just give you an example of the level of pollution we're dealing with in the Niger Delta, which I'm sure you are aware. In 2011, the United Nations Environment Program conducted an assessment of selected sites in Ogoni land. to see the level of hydrocarbon pollution in those areas. And it came out with a report in 2011, basically saying that the Ogoni environment was so terribly polluted that it would take at least between 25 and 30 years to bring it back to full life. And that it would be the biggest ever environmental remediation attempt embarked upon by man. And that it would take several billions of dollars to get this kind of job done. Now, that assessment by the United Nations Environment Program was only carried out in selected sites in Ogoniland. And we have a Niger Delta with 9 states where oil has been extracted nonstop for at least 60 years. What we're saying is that we have massive environmental destruction and pollution in the Niger Delta region, especially, and it gets worse. It gets worse because we know that the people in the Niger Delta region are fisher folks and farmers. This is their major source of livelihood. And that livelihood source has been taken away from them holistically. So gas flaring, for example, makes it difficult for crops to do well. That's a fact. That is documented fact. And also, some of the people engage in hunting activities where you have the forest constantly, brightened by gas flaring. It's impossible for animals to live there. So you find a situation where animals have shifted far away into the forest, away from the reach of people who hunt for them. So the effects on livelihoods are devastating and terrible. On agricultural production, it is terrible. When the rains come down after gas flaring, it gets into the river and supports the pollution of the rivers to the extent that aquatic life that live in the river, live in the creeks, live in the swamps can no longer exist. And so the people have got to migrate, move away from their traditional sources of livelihood. And part of these issues are the reason that has led to the level of frustration which we sometimes see coming from the Niger Delta region. And again, I think that the government has not paid adequate attention to ending gas flaring. This practice has been illegal since at least 1984 in the country. And they have been outlawing gas flaring since 1979. And I'm telling you that even the 2030 deadline, which is just in a period of 9 years from now, will not be met. Because if you want to end a process, if you want to end something you consider economically detrimental, what you do is develop a blueprint. What we expect to see is a blueprint. And that blueprint will have timelines. So what was the timeline between 2020 and 2021? What was the target? Have we achieved any such target? And the answer is no, because there is no blueprint, there are no timelines, and it's just an opportunity to keep flaring until 2030. And then we say, oh, we place another deadline, maybe this time around to 2050. And I stand to be corrected. My opinion on this is simple, that there is no way we can end gas flaring without proposing very strong sanctions on oil companies and people who flare gas. Imagine if we said, if you flare gas in any of your fields, you lose your license to extract crude oil. Imagine if that was the sanction, rather than paltry fines of $2. Just imagine if that was the sanction. We would have seen an end to gas flaring. But then again, it boils down on the willingness, the sincerity, and the good heart of the government. And unfortunately, I do not think that the government of Nigeria feels any level of empathy toward the poor, suffering people of the Niger Delta region.
These oil companies that are flaring this gas, and possibly people who are in government officials, who should be doing something about it?
Well, okay, that's the body. Please, body, go ahead.
Okay, so it's in our custom, and I think in every human community, when you commit a crime, you have to restitute for it. You have to pay for that crime. And that's kind of restitution or paying comes in different forms in every culture. We are no longer debating the fact that the activities of multinational oil corporations are impacting on our environment. They are impacting on local livelihoods. They are inducing climate change. They are releasing carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, etc., etc. So who should pay? So there is a global movement now to hold oil corporations accountable for all the harms that they have caused on the environment everywhere. And the Niger Delta, it's most significant that I mean, it is almost like the emblem of pollution, degradation caused by oil multinational. So there is what we now call the liability roadmap. And we are asking governments around the world, and particularly the Nigerian government, to take these guidelines very seriously, to say that, look, when you impact all the environment, you have to pay for restoring the environment. We are saying that there are modes of production, and that also is a little bit enshrined in what we have as environmental impact assessment. That there are modes of production that when you discover that this method of production is going to harm people, is going to harm environment, it's either you stop it or you change that mode of production. That if the oil corporations cannot extract oil in such a way that it will not damage the environment, we should begin to look for an alternative mode of development. By the way, either we like it or not, the end of oil is near. And so, when Nigeria government continue to allow oil corporations to damage our environment, which is our biggest resource, to support a sustainable economy, or act now and allow our local economy, environmentally resilient kind of production to fester. I think the right decision for government to do today is to be very definite about ending gas flaring. The legislative framework should be there to say, look, you have to stop gas flaring because as of today, there is a court pronouncement that it is illegal. And if you must flare gas, then you have to pay huge, huge fine. But let me also add this, that as part of the concept of the liability roadmap that we're now pushing into the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, is that you will also pay for your historical damage on the environment. Take, for instance, if you are a shell and you have been extracting oil right from Oloibiri since 1950, the Nigerian government should be able to set up experts that will quantify how much of infraction you have caused and dollarize that infraction and make such a multinational companies to pay monies that be used to restitute our environment, that will be used to restitute the farm of our people, the fishing ponds, and restore our local economy.
Now, there is this figure coming from government quarters, at least 2016 figures, 117 flaring sites in those 8 states that we talk about. Now, between 2016 and now, there could have been more, but those 117 flaring sites are still there. They are still flaring gas. They are still destroying the environment. They are still impacting livelihoods. They are still impacting the health of people living in these places. Beyond the legislation and sanctions, what can the people themselves and possibly state governments do to reduce the impact of gas flaring?
Well, I can, state governments can do quite a lot. State governments can do quite a lot. So I think that the potent question is, what are state governments willing to do to end the effect of gas flaring? What are they willing? No, what they can do. I think that the blackmail of the oil companies has gotten to state governments. And the blackmail is that if you end gas flaring, oil production will stop. And state governments do not want to hear oil production stopping. That's the fact. And that's a very big blackmail that has continued for decades. And I think that argument is what has made it, has incapacitated state governments and made it impossible for them to take actions to end gas flaring. But if you look at the Nigerian constitution, the real responsibility to act in relation to this level of pollution is with the federal government, strictly speaking. It's the responsibility of the federal government to take action, make laws to end gas flaring. And the communities, on the other hand, can do a lot, but they cannot do more than advocacy. They cannot do more than continuously advocate for an end to gas flaring. An alternative to advocacy will be insurrectionary, which we do not advise in any way. it will be insurrectionary. But I think that the government has a responsibility to ensure that this ugly practice ends. Because the reality, like my friend Bode said, the reality is that the age of oil is coming to an end. We're already seeing a phase of oil that is, I mean, the oil industry and the extraction activities associated with it is changing gradually. Yeah. So you are seeing a lot of the major oil companies, they are divesting, they are shifting their assets outside the offshore. They're all going offshore, selling their other assets to smaller Nigerian-owned oil companies while they move the bulk of their assets offshore. When they sell these assets, they sell their responsibilities and their assets, and they have responsibilities. Some of them historical responsibilities for environmental degradation, and they are abdicating that responsibility, and the government is doing nothing about it. And I think it is important for the government to put in place a structure and a framework that ensures that before any oil company sells off its assets, we need to carry out an environmental audit of the historical damage done by that oil company and find a way to fix that damage before that company divests. Unfortunately, the government is not doing this. And all analysts are saying that the age of oil extraction could end in about 20, 30, 50 years. Oil will no longer be an allure as it used to be. What happens at that time when oil is no longer as valuable as it is? What will happen to the people of the Niger Delta region? They will have no livelihoods, and they will have no places, no avenues to exist. It's important to also note this, that like Bode said, gas flaring contributes significantly to global warming and climate change. And it's ironical that the Niger Delta is one of the most impacted by global warming. Since 2012, we have seen significant increases in sea levels. In October, I went to join Krama in a Ahoda local government area of Rivers State, and I visited flood-ravaged communities where sea levels had risen to about 20 feet. So right now, for 3 months every year, people living around the banks of the Niger and Orashi River have to move to higher ground. 3 months every year, they become refugees in their own land. And this is an effect of climate change. And that's an oil producing community. So what they are producing that is poisoning them environmentally is also contributing to making them refugees in their own land. This is an irony that beats my imagination. And I think it is important that any reasonable government does something about this and does it quickly.
Thank you so much, Ken. Indeed, it's an irony that those who should be coming to talk about what government is doing, which is the agency of government so charged with this responsibility, like the NOSRA, has refused to come on this program to come and tell Nigerians what exactly is being done to ensure that people in these regions, in these states, in these estates that have been itemized are not going to continue to suffer from gas flaring indefinitely, and their livelihoods constantly threatened. Mr. Akinbode Oluwafemi, thank you so much for joining us. You are the Executive Director, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa, CAPA, former Deputy Director, Environmental Rights Action and Friends of the Earth, Nigeria. Thank you for your time. And Ken Henshaw, Executive Director, We the People, an NGO working closely with Niger Delta communities in the context of oil extraction and its fallouts, as well as the management of public revenue. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us on the program today. All right, that's it for today. We look forward to bringing you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. My name is Imoni Amarere. Bye for now.